Good afternoon and welcome to our Hot Topics. I am Nikki Devitt, president of the Petoskey Chamber, and we are so happy you could join us for today's program, Employers' Obligations as Michigan Gets Back to Work. But before we get started, I'm joined on stage by a wonderful person and huge supporter of the Petoskey Chamber and all chambers. This is our chance to thank our sponsors, Comfort Keepers and Citizens National Bank. Today's important virtual event actually comes to you free of charge because of their support. Hot Topics. This is an essential program we've been doing for several years with Comfort Keepers. This is where we offer you the opportunity to have conversations, become educated, and learn more about the critical issues in our community. And so with me here on stage is Russ Knopp to say a few words.
Thanks, Nikki. Hi, everybody. I'm Russ Knopp. My wife and I are the owners of Comfort Keepers. At Comfort Keepers, we help seniors stay independent and live in their homes. We are so proud to be sponsoring Hot Topics again this year and working with the Petoskey Area Chamber of Commerce because, let's face it, this chamber has rocked it during COVID. And everybody needs to give them a big round of applause and gratitude for everything they have done and helped so many small businesses navigate every turn every day. And I just can't thank this chamber enough. So we're very happy to sponsor Hot Topics today, and it's a topic that every employer is really, really interested in, and we've got an expert today. So thank you, everybody. Hope you enjoy the presentation.
Thank you so much, Russ, and thank you very much for the kind words. It's investors and supporters like you that make it all worthwhile for us to support our businesses as much as we can, so we're happy to. So now I would like to take a moment to thank Citizens National Bank, who is a sponsor of our Winfluence programming. So Winfluence kind of sits over top of our Hot Topics. And that programming is a really broad scope that we started right before the pandemic and kind of had to put on hold a little bit. But it's aimed at building stronger businesses through education and enrichment. And here today for Citizens National Bank is Regina Patton. So hi, Regina.
Hi, Nikki. Wonderful. It is a pleasure to be here today, and I'm going to ditto everything that Russ said. Russ said it is an honor and a privilege to be here, to be a sponsor and partner with the Petoskey Chamber. You guys rock when it comes to everything that you've done to support the community. Citizens National Bank has also had the honor of celebrating 90 years in downtown Sheboygan as Michigan's northern Michigan's community bank. We've been serving Sheboygan County for 90 years, and we look forward to serving Emmett County from our new headquarters on the corner of downtown Petoskey. We just purchased the Petoskey News Review. Forward to joining the downtown community from our new CNB is my bank with financial solutions for you at home as well as at work. We hope CNB can be your bank too. And thank you for the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you so much, Regina. We appreciate it. And we're excited for your new location as well. Before we get our program, now a couple housekeeping notes. Technology is always still not our friend, so bear with us if we do have any issues. We appreciate your patience. We do our best, our speakers do as well, and just make the most out of whatever the situation comes to be. Also, please utilize the chat function. Use that for questions, comments, and we're sure you're going to have a lot because this topic, as Russ said, is something we're all thinking about. Employers' obligations. What are you obligated to do as we return to the offices? So we want you here. We want to hear from you, and we'll take an opportunity at the end to answer your questions as well. So now I would like to invite Laura Dinan to the stage. She is an attorney with Plunkett Cooney in its Petoskey office, and she concentrates her practice on representing public and private employers in all aspects of employment law, including labor relations. With over 20 years of experience in employment law, Ms. Dinan has a broad client base of small to medium-sized businesses, including healthcare practices, municipalities, and large insurance companies. She handles cases in federal courts and state courts, as well as arbitrations and administrative agency hearings. Ms. Dinan is a past president of the board of directors for the Northern Michigan SHRM, an affiliate of the Society for Human Resource Management. And we are so lucky to have her join us once again today with her expertise. She's in our backyard and she's a phenomenal speaker and she has a breadth of information on this. So Laura, I would love you to join me on stage so we can get you started. Laura, I don't see you, so it might just be on my end. Here you come. There we go.
All right.
Now you're good.
Up. Now you can see me. Hopefully you can hear me. I found those little icons.
and I'm going to let you run with it. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everybody. Hopefully we have this technology down. It's a new platform for me, and we've had a lot of glitches, but I am not Emily. I'm Laura, but I'm using Emily's computer because that was the only way we could get it to work. So pop up your questions. As I go through this, if there's something really timely that I notice, I'll try to answer it while we go along, but I might, with 3 screens, it gets a little more complicated. So we might take them at the end, but we'll answer them all, hopefully. So this really is applicable to everybody, whether you still have employees in your workplace and never sent them home, or whether you sent all your employees home or some of them home and are thinking about bringing them back. I've tried to cover everything. It should be pretty timely. I re-researched everything yesterday because, as most of you probably know, these orders are just changing constantly. So we'll try to get this rolling and see what kind of questions you have. So one of the first things that businesses who did send their employees home need to think about, you need to think as you're bringing people back or anticipating bringing people back, start thinking ahead. And I realize that may not be possible at this point since you were allowed to return people a week ago, and we've taken off running. It's definitely summer. It's definitely high season and all hands on deck. So some of the things that hopefully you considered, and if you haven't, you can start thinking about it now. Giving employees a few weeks notice is the best way to bring them back, especially people who have childcare issues, who may have vulnerable people in their homes and have to figure out how they're going to deal with possible exposure to COVID in the workplace or being out and about and bringing it home. So a few weeks notice is best. And as you're thinking about it, think about what your employees' concerns might be and try to develop talking points to talk it up and encourage them to come back and, try to anticipate and satisfy their concerns before you even have to open the conversation. So when you reach out, your employees will be able to tell that you were already thinking about this and you're taking it seriously and you're trying to make this the best situation for everybody, given the parameters that we all live with these days. Some of the positives of returning to work that you can emphasize are, they're going to get to connect with their coworkers again. They're going to maybe have increased collaboration in the workplace, not through electronics like Zoom and Remo and other platforms. It's a lot nicer to sit around a conference table with people, socially distanced, of course, that you're going to have your safety measures in place. And that's going to be your communications with your employees. You're going to need to assess, first of all, are your employees really effectively working from home? If so, maybe you want to give them an option or direct certain employees to stay home or make some kind of modified work schedule. And we'll talk about that down the line, but assess how it's working out with people from home. You didn't have a choice before, now you do. Assess your workplaces. Are you able to establish social distancing for everybody in the workplace? And if not, then you flip back to who's effective working from home. If you laid off employees when COVID hit and everybody had to stay home, if you haven't already brought them back, do you still have a need for those employees? If not, they can just remain on layoff and, you parted ways and they can move on. But if you need them back, there are considerations involved in that. Did you furlough employees, which meant that they're still your employees, they weren't laid off, but at this point, do you need to bring them back, or have you readjusted the workplace so that they're no longer needed? And at this point, do you need to lay them off? In conjunction with assessing those needs, do you need to restructure and rewrite your job descriptions to fit your current work needs and workplace? It's for many people a totally different situation than it was in March of 2020, 18 months ago or however long that was. So those are some considerations that you should be thinking about as you think about bringing people back. And then when you're also thinking about who to return to the workplace, issues that are going to come up are who has childcare needs and issues with kids being out of school. Over the school year, it was a problem with people who needed to homeschool on a regular basis or chose to. Now, it's my understanding, and what I'm hearing is that childcare is not coming back 100%. It's still in a state of flux for many people, and some of the summer programs that people may have had available or summer babysitters are no longer out there, or at least aren't available this summer. So you have to think about those employees. What can you do to support them? Are those people who could stay home and work remotely? So think through the issues your employees are going to confront as you try to bring them back in the workplace, and see if you can get creative. And I probably should have prefaced this, but I guess it's just a given in my mind. It is an employee's world right now, because if you aren't the employer that they want to work for, they can go down the street and get another job. There aren't enough employees to fill all the jobs. And that's a very broad statement, but in general, people can get another job if they just can't meet what you want them or need them to be doing to bring them back into the workplace. So again, assess who has the ability to do their job from home effectively, remotely. One big thing you're going to hear and you're going to need to consider and you're going to need to address is you are going to have employees who have requests for accommodation and or needs for accommodation, which are not necessarily the same thing. You obviously have to address people who need accommodations. If it's just a request for an accommodation, I guess maybe it's semantics, but I'm picturing requests for accommodations, wanting to stay home for childcare reasons. That's not a protected reason. But if someone is high risk, and a doctor says it's not safe for them to be in the office, or they have to work within certain parameters, those are things that are covered under the ADA, and we'll talk about that later too. But those are the kinds of things you need to be aware of and you need to address before you can bring people back into the workplace. So if you've got furloughed workers, determine if you're going to recall them or lay them off. You need to look at your current business conditions. Otherwise, if you don't have a need and you're going to lay off or terminate them, you have to consider the WARN Act, which may or may not apply to many of you, but that's the law that says that if you lay off a certain percentage of your workforce, or even a department or a facility, then there are certain time deadlines that you're forced to meet, or there's extreme penalties. You end up paying laid off workers for maybe 60 days. It's a very specific act, but if you are closing a facility, closing a department, laying off a significant percentage of employees, you need to look into the WARN Act and see if that applies. You also need to do a disparate impact analysis. Is your choice of who to lay off or terminate impacting a certain segment of the population, your workforce population, that might, affect a protected group? A lot of times when there's a bigger layoff and employers are looking at reconfiguring their workforce, they might favor the younger, newer employees because they're cheaper. They've got a longer work life ahead of them. They figure the older employees probably just want to get closer to retirement anyway. Those kinds of decisions have a disparate impact on certain categories of people, and that's illegal. So consider that. And that kind of piggybacks on the potential for a discrimination claim, but that discrimination claims are broader than disparate impact. Do you have an employee who took a lot of medical leave time while they were on furlough, or had medical issues, or while they were working from home? Do you have people who took every minute available to them of all the new federal leaves? You've got to consider whether if you have people like that, and those are the people that you terminate or lay off, that could come across as discrimination. It could be the basis for a discrimination claim. So you have to look at the big picture if you're going to lay off any employees or terminate them, to make sure that they aren't going to have some kind of basis for a lawsuit. And if you're going to pay people or lay off or terminate people, and consider paying severance, or if you are paying severance, make sure you get a release from them. Anytime you pay people or give them something that they're not entitled to, you should get a release, and that just protects you going forward, and you're done. You're officially done. You don't have to worry that they could bring any of these types of claims back to you. Okay, I lost my cursor. Sorry. Here we go. Again, communicate with your employees, emphasize the positives of in-person return, emphasize safety precautions, or that they'll be in place. Invite feedback to a specified person. So oftentimes it's the HR manager. So you put the information out there. It might be the president of the company. It might be the managers contact their own employees, but you really, it would be best for all feedback coming in from those employees to go to one designated person. So it's HR is the best person for that. But if you're in a smaller company, maybe it's the owner, maybe it's the general manager, but pick one person, because then you will know what everybody's thinking, and B, you can send a uniform message back to those people. You don't want it coming in from every direction, secondhand, third hand. So just identify that person in the beginning and give that information to your employees, that if they have questions, concerns, whatever, to contact this person. And again, try to anticipate their concerns and develop responsive messages before they even get the chance to complain to you. When you're deciding how to return employees, once you've already decided who to return, you have to think about how to bring them back. Do you want to gradually bring back certain groups, certain departments? You're going to have to look at each employee that you're bringing back. Do you want to bring them back in person full time, and make a decision with respect to each employee? Do you want to do a rotating schedule with people part-time in person, part-time remote? Do you want that type of schedule to be indefinite or permanent? Maybe you're downsizing your office space and you want to go to office sharing. And so we're going to do this permanently, every other week or 2 days, 3 days, 3 days, 2 days, whatever it is. Think about that. Or there may be people that you want to put full-time remote. They've been doing a great job from home. There's, savings on your space, and you were surprised, but you found out it works great. Or they really want to be home remote and they were very effective, and so you decide to allow it. Again, an analysis with respect to every single employee so that they know what they're doing. And I'm sorry, I'm looking crazy, but I'm trying to get my cursor over in the other screen. There we go. So once you decide who you're bringing back, I lost my slide post. Sorry, I want to make sure. You have to have an updated MIOSHA compliant return to work plan. And many of you, especially if you have people in your workplace, probably already have a return to work plan that complied with MIOSHA. But this is a living document. If you drafted one back in last May or June, it's probably not valid. Parts of it will be, but as the orders change, you need to update that document. So if you're just bringing people back right now, and even if you're not, MIOSHA came out with a new order last week. So you need to constantly be reviewing that. I would suggest maybe monthly or something. And again, you're not going to have to change it every month, but there are going to be changes. Every time you hear that, you're probably getting news blasts or some kind of information from the state. And if you're not, go on MIOSHA's website and sign up for their news releases, press releases. Same with Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, because they'll send out a blast when something changes. And then you need to look at what changes and update your plan. It is a living document. It's not static. You can't rely on what you did last May or June because the rules have changed. And finally, you need to assess and reconfigure your workspaces if necessary, because you've got the social distancing issues. So you need to look while you're assessing who to bring back and where to put them. Can your physical facility accommodate social distancing or separated workspaces with everybody there? And if not, maybe you need that modified schedule. Sorry, there we go. I'm going to back up. So you can start with small groups. You can stagger schedules by day of the week, by time of day. If everybody can come back at the same time and you can maintain social distancing, you can bring everybody back at the same time and just put everybody back where they were and go forward. I don't think everybody's going to be able to do that, but if you can, it's an option available to you. So I'm going to try to go through the highlights of the current orders and guidelines that are out there, probably pretty minimally, but the websites are awesome. If you go to the CDC, if you go to the EEOC, if you go to Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, if you go to MIOSHA and or OSHA, everything is explained in great detail. So I'm going to hit the highlights, but know that you should do that if you have questions that don't get answered today. So the CDC came out on their most recent order was May 28th, 2021. There were a couple earlier ones in May, but I'm going with the most recent one they have out there. So as of May 28th, CDC says fully vaccinated people no longer need to wear a mask or physically distance in any setting except where required by federal, state, local, tribal, or territorial laws, rules, and regulations, including local business and workplace guidance. And that's key because you're going to hear that Michigan law is a little different from that, from what the CDC says in other areas. And it allows local businesses to make their own decisions about what they want to control in their workplace. So the CDC also says that if you have fully vaccinated people with no symptoms and no known exposure, they are exempt from routine everyday screening programs if feasible. That is not okay under Michigan rules and laws. So CDC says that, but you have to follow the more restrictive, which most of you as HR people are familiar with. You always go with the most restrictive rules or regulations when there's a conflict between federal and state. So CDC says you can resume domestic travel with no testing before or after travel and no self-quarantine after travel, which I had a lot of questions in the beginning and last summer over employees who were taking vacations and the employer didn't know what to do with them when they came back. So CDC says if you're fully vaccinated, you can travel, you don't test before or after travel, and there's no self-quarantine period. So if your employees take vacations, and they're fully vaccinated, then it's just like pre-COVID. CDC also says you don't have to test after a known exposure if the person is asymptomatic, and there's some specific exceptions to that. But for the most part, you're not going to be testing every time one of your employees is exposed to something. The CDC requires testing for fully vaccinated people if you experience or if they are experiencing COVID-19 symptoms. But if they've been exposed but no symptoms, no testing until or if they suffer symptoms. For unvaccinated people, CDC says keep up the everyday preventive actions. You still require proper mask wearing, social distancing of 6 feet apart, avoiding crowds and poorly ventilated areas, washing hands often, sanitizing and disinfecting often. And the CDC came out with a list. It's on their website somewhere. I think it is less restrictive, the sanitizing measures that they've come out with, more practical. They tell you the chemicals you should use and can use and how often you have to do it. Before it was every surface, several times a day. And now I think it's maybe once a day, once every other day. I don't know. But you can go on the CDC website and look up sanitizing and disinfecting, and they have loosened those guidelines. So then Michigan Department of Health and Human Services came out with a couple orders in May. The most recent order from them is June 1st. And they have said that fully vaccinated individuals do not need to wear masks indoors or outdoors. There are still gathering restrictions and contact tracing under certain conditions, and those primarily, I believe, are restaurants. So if you go out to eat, they're going to want your contact information because there's still high risk in restaurants because of the fact that people take off their masks to eat. And so the health department needs the contact tracing information should there be an outbreak traced back to a restaurant. Health and Human Services says you no longer have to enforce face mask requirements outdoors. If you're fully vaccinated, no mask indoors. So this next one, they call it an establishment, but it's basically any business. And the person in charge of the establishment or business has to prohibit gatherings at their business unless the person makes a good faith effort to ensure everyone in their establishment, including employees. So think businesses, think your employees. If you're a retail store owner, it applies to you, and it would be your employees and customers. A business office type setting, your vendors, your customers, people that come through, anyone that comes through your workplace has to comply with Section 4A of the new rules under Health and Human Services. And the rules, basically, the two rules it references, the sections, are the mask wearing and for non-vaccinated and the socially distancing for non-vaccinated. And so Michigan Department of Health and Human Services defined a good faith effort as including, this is not an exclusive list, there might be something else you could do to comply, but if you do one of these four things, you will be considered in compliance with the new rule. So a good faith effort could be posting signs that wearing a mask is required unless a person falls into the specified exceptions, which is, fully vaccinated, kids under 2, medically unable. There's a whole list, and that's out there on their website if you need that information updated. Or they could ask people that come into their business who are not wearing masks if the person falls into a specified exception. If the person says they do, then you're stuck because you can't really ask any further questions. If they say they fall into an exception, that's the end of the conversation. The business can require face masks on all employees and patrons, regardless of whether they're vaccinated or not, and regardless of whether CDC or MIOSHA or anyone requires it. Your private business owners can do anything they want, and so they can, to address that issue of how do you trust people or how do you believe people, how do you know whether they are complying or not. If they're unvaccinated and not wearing a mask, there's no real way to check it. So in the alternative, you can just require everyone to wear face masks. And then any other policy that you come up with that is designed to ensure compliance with face masks for unvaccinated people and socially distancing for unvaccinated people. And the Michigan Department of Health and Services order goes away on July 1st, but MIOSHA has an order that we're going to talk about next, and the MIOSHA order is in place until October 14th. So even though Health and Human Services, you're going to hear a lot about it, that there's no restrictions, nothing in place, as of July 1st is not true for you as an employer, because MIOSHA governs employers, and their rules are still in place until October 14 of 2021. So that's a really key distinction. So MIOSHA came out finally with the new rule that they updated May 24th. They lagged behind CDC and Health and Human Services, and their prior rule was inconsistent. And as you can hear, a little bit of this is maybe inconsistent with those. But again, MIOSHA's most restrictive will be in place longest. And so you have to comply with MIOSHA. There's a continued requirement for the updated written COVID-19 preparedness and response plan for all employers. We talked about a little bit before that this is a living document, not a static document. So make sure yours is updated with to reflect your current situation, your current social distancing requirements, your current mask plan, your current disinfecting plan. And, some of it's going to be less restrictive because the rules have changed in favor of loosening up. But so make sure your plan reflects that. MIOSHA has a continued requirement for masks when employees cannot maintain 6 feet of social distancing or in common areas for any non-vaccinated person. So MIOSHA is going along with CDC and Department of Health and Human Services, if people are vaccinated, they do not have to maintain the 6 feet of social distancing or wear masks in the workplace, but non-vaccinated, that requirement continues. MIOSHA says that compliance with social distancing and mask rules can be accomplished in a manner deemed effective for the place of employment, which may include. So they, again, give you leeway, just like Health and Human Services did, but they give you suggestions on how to comply with the socially distancing and mask rules for unvaccinated people. And they advise that if you keep records of whether employees are fully vaccinated and exempt the fully vaccinated from this rule, that's complying. If you post signs in the work area reminding employees that are not fully vaccinated to wear face coverings and maintain appropriate distancing, that's compliance. If you allow or require remote work for unvaccinated employees, that is compliance. Or if you require face coverings and social distancing for all employees, regardless of vaccination status, that's compliance with the MIOSHA rules. So this is a big difference. Employers shall conduct a daily self-screening protocol for anyone entering the workplace. That's been in place for MIOSHA from very early on when they allowed people to go back into the workplace at the end of May, beginning of June last year. CDC has removed that recommendation. Health and Human Services is silent on it, but MIOSHA still requires it for everyone, even your vaccinated employees. And I sat through a MIOSHA webinar a week or two ago talking about this, and their reasoning is that employees who've had the vaccination can still carry the disease, and they're trying, the purpose of all the MIOSHA regulations and rules on this topic is to keep the symptoms out of the workplace. And so if someone's had a vaccination and is asymptomatic but might be a disease carrier, you know, you may not catch it with the daily screening, but they're hoping that they're still going to weed those people out. The whole purpose is to keep the symptoms out of the workplace. So MIOSHA still requires daily self-screenings for all employees entering the workplace, and vendors, customers, patients, whatever it is. So make sure that you're still doing that. I know the employers hate it. I know the employees hate it, but it is still required. And if MIOSHA got a complaint, they will come in and investigate. And that is, you know, one of the first things they're going to look for. And the way MIOSHA comes in is pretty much, even in non-COVID times, it's oftentimes from an employee complaint. And with COVID, that's primarily why they would come in, and they get a lot of complaints from employees. So if your employees think that you are not complying with the law, all they have to do is shoot an email, pick up the phone, and call MIOSHA, and MIOSHA will come knocking. And so you want to have proof that you are doing those daily self-screenings if MIOSHA comes knocking. You're still required to provide training to your employees regarding COVID-19, you know, the disinfecting, the hand washing. You could do that, I'm sure, through signs posted in your workplace. But there's still a training component that is required under the MIOSHA rule, which is in effect until October. They did loosen the record keeping. Initially, any records regarding like the daily self-screenings, disinfecting, things like that had to be kept for a year. Now they only have to be kept for 6 months. So if your record's older than 6 months, you can get rid of those. They're down to, they're down to 6 months from a year. So then the EEOC, not to be left out of things, came out with updated guidance on May 28th. So all of this happened, you know, a week ago. And I'm sure that we're going to see some refining as summer goes on, but again, sign up for those blasts from these agencies and you'll be current. So the EEOC very specifically says that employers can require all employees that are physically entering the workplace to be vaccinated as long as the employer complies with the ADA and Title VII. So yes, you can require employees to be vaccinated and you can require proof of vaccination. We get a lot of questions from employers who are afraid to ask for proof of vaccination because they think it's a HIPAA violation. Just get that out of your head if that's what you were thinking. HIPAA doesn't generally apply to employers. HIPAA applies to healthcare providers and their billing services. There's a few limited nuances to that, but in general, employers can request medical information from employees. They just have to comply with the ADA, which requires that the medical information be kept in a separate file and protected as private information, but it's not a HIPAA violation to ask for vaccination cards. And you can copy it and you can put it in their health file. EEOC also said that employers can offer incentives to employees to voluntarily provide proof of vaccination if the vaccination came from a third party. So if you want to reward your employees who bring you a vaccine card through some kind of incentive, whether it's extra time off, gift cards, some kind of payment, you can do that if they got it elsewhere. For employers that are offering vaccinations in the workplace, the rules are a little more stringent. You can offer incentives for employees to get vaccinated as long as incentives aren't coercive. If you're doing the vaccinating or bringing someone in, say, bring the health department into your workplace, you can offer it to everyone without incentives, no problem. If you want to bring them in and that's not enough of an incentive to just get it in the workplace, that you give everyone a free lunch is not going to be a problem, but a gift card or $100 bonus or something, when it starts to be a big incentive, EEOC will look at that questionably because there are screening questions that employees have to answer before they can get the vaccine. And then that is considered, it's suspicious because it might be a medical exam under the EEOC and under the ADA, and you run the risk of crossing the line as to what's okay and not. So you can give incentives. I'll just use the expression for people to bring their vaccine cards to you that they got it elsewhere. You can reward those people. The only thing you have to consider is that if someone has a disability that prohibits them from being able to get a vaccine, or they have a bona fide religious exemption, you have to do something for those individuals incentive wise, because otherwise that would be discriminating. It would be a violation of ADA and Title VII. But just people who don't want to get the vaccination and therefore don't get the incentive, that's okay. Employers can provide employees and their family members with information to educate them about COVID-19 vaccines and raise awareness about the benefits. Whether you give handouts, send emails, have your health carrier send information, but you can encourage people to get it. And that's not discrimination or a problem with the EEOC. So the EEOC also has a technical guidance, and they suggest some potential accommodations. I want to go through something before we get to potential accommodations, but the technical guidance also says that employers can require vaccinations and proof as long as you allow ADA and Title VII exceptions. You can offer incentives for vaccinations by third parties, which we talked about. You can offer nominal incentives if you're going to bring them into the vaccinators into the workplace. But again, those have to be pretty minimal because you can't be coercive to try to make people who might have a disability or a reason not to get it feel that they're being discriminated against. And you can provide the education. EEOC says you cannot require antibody testing. I do get some questions about this. Some people confuse antibody testing with viral testing. The antibody testing only shows if you have already had COVID. You cannot, that's a violation. I don't know if it's a violation. I don't know how to say it, but EEOC says you can't do that. It's a no-no. So don't encourage or request antibody testing. You can, however, request viral testing of employees. Again, if they don't pass your health screening or they're unvaccinated and want to come back in the workplace, it's okay to request those kinds of tests. As far as accommodations for unvaccinated employees, I think a lot of you are familiar with the ADA and the interactive process. Even if you haven't had to go through it, you probably have heard those terms, you know it's out there. The way it works is if someone has a disability that qualifies as a disability under the ADA, they can go to their employer and ask for an accommodation and to enable them to do the essential functions of their job. The employer has an obligation to engage at that point in the interactive process, which means exchanging information with them, trying to figure out what's out there that could accommodate the disability, assessing the best approach for the employer. Anyway, it's an engaging process, and that's going to be happening, I think, fairly frequently. It already has been, as people were called back last summer, and it's going to continue as employers bring people back full scale this summer. You always have to go through the interactive process. You may not have to accommodate the persons, but depending on what the disability or the concerns are, the EEO Technical Guidance says these are some potential accommodations you could make for unvaccinated employees who have concerns about coming back into the workplace or want to come back in the workplace. You can require mask wearing, which you have to do under Michigan law. You can require them to social distance from coworkers and non-employees, and vice versa, require those coworkers and non-employees to socially distance from the unvaccinated employees if it's a disability situation. You can allow working a modified shift, depending on what the person does. Maybe they can come in very early in the morning if it suits them, or work after people go home at night. You can require them to get periodic tests for COVID-19. You can allow remote work, or you can offer them a reassignment to a position that won't expose them, better meets their needs and won't expose them to potential disease. So, how do you return your employees? You should communicate, again, a plan several weeks ahead of time if you can. Communicate your safety plans, social distancing, personal hygiene, PPE, that you're regularly cleaning the office or the work setting. Communicate whether they're going to be remote or in person and how that's going to work. Remind them to bring everything back. They took monitors home, they took computers home, mouses, chairs, whatever it was to do their work, files. Remind them they have to bring all that back when they come to work. if you're going to bring furloughed people back, it's a good idea to send them a letter outlining, almost like a offer letter when you offering employment to a new employee. So you send a letter outlining the terms and conditions of their return. You make an offer with a return to work date, how much they're going to be paid, whether they're going to be exempt or non-exempt, if there have been any changes to their position since they went out on furlough. Do they have a new job description? Does it have a new name? Have you combined positions? Any changes to what the job will be when they come back, so they know what they're coming back to, the date that you are calling them back to work. If there's been any impact on their benefits while they were on furlough, you want to explain that to them and what they need to do to restart their benefits, or what's out there for them. If you have new policies, even if they're not new, if you're going to bring people back from furlough, you might want to send them a copy of your ADA policy. If you have any new policies regarding returning to the workplace, sanitizing, things like that, anything that's going to be new to them since they went out on furlough, it's a good idea to include copies of that with your furlough letter, or callback letter. In some jobs, there might be retraining requirements. There might have been continuing education that got dropped, or whatever it is. If there's going to be retraining required, let them know what that is. Let them get started on it. Or, if you do it in-house, set a time that they can come and do that. And again, contact info for HR or whoever is going to be the point person for dealing with questions that employees being called back will have. Communicate to every employee whether they'll be expected to return to the office full time, whether they'll be on a rotating part remote, part in person, whether they'll continue working remotely, and if so, is that going to be indefinite or permanent? And again, when somebody makes a request for a reasonable accommodation, then you need to engage in the interactive process. So you, as part of this process, need to update your policies and remind everybody that's coming back, regardless of whether they've been working remote or furloughed. You probably want to send a welcoming email and remind them of your dress code, which may have changed. I'm certain, I would be 100% sure that no employee who worked remotely 100% complied with any dress code while they were off. And so people are going to have to get back in that frame of mind. So remind them of the dress code and any changes you might have made to it. Remind them of security issues, codes, anything like that. Breaks and lunches, the times, what they're expected there. COVID-19 screenings will be required each day. Enforce testing and symptom assessment protocols. Remind them of the quarantine policy, and that if they have symptoms and or positive test results and or exposure. So you're going to also follow the CDC guidelines, decide masks or no masks, in-person meetings or no meetings, or remote meetings. And a key thing is, don't forget about Public Act 339 of 2020. That was the law that was passed in October and amended in December, and it is a statute and something the legislature actually got done last year. And that is the law that prohibits employers from retaliating or discriminating against employees for taking leave time available to them with COVID-19. It's important. It's similar to the other anti-retaliation and discrimination laws, both federal and state, but it's specific to COVID things. So refresh yourself on that. If you're getting pushback from your employees before you make any decision as to how to handle the pushback, because you don't want to be accused of discriminating on the basis of something related to COVID. Vaccinations, you can mandate them, but think about these things. Is it appropriate or necessary for your workplace, or is it just easier to do it? It can be very hard to enforce. If you're mandating it, you should consider whether or not you will pay for employees to take time off work to go get vaccinated. If you do mandate it, the only thing that you should request from those employees is proof of vaccination. You don't want any other medical information, just that little vaccine card. You can make a copy, put it in the health file. All right, I lost my cursor again, sorry. I think a lot of employers are encouraging voluntary vaccinations because it's just easier. Many are offering incentives, but just remember, if be mindful of whether they're so big that they could be considered coercive. You have to accommodate and can't discriminate against people with disabilities or those with bona fide religious objections. And again, keep any proof of vaccination in the medical file, not the regular personnel file. Okay, that was a lot of information, and I know I'm running over, but if you guys have time, I'm happy to do questions. I was not following the chat, sorry.
Not to worry, Laura, not at all. Tons of information. And the thing is, there's so much information with this, and it is a lot to take. So we did record this, so we're going to share it out. But we did have a couple response questions that I wanted to address. So, and Jane, we'll get these questions to her. How does the MIOSHA compliant return to work plan impact volunteers? So looking at it from the standpoint of a nonprofit organization that's dependent upon volunteers to run, can they legally ask clients and volunteers if they've been vaccinated?
Yes, because MIOSHA protects people in the workplace from everything. So they're coming into your workplace. So it's the same with vendors, with customers, with clients, with volunteers. They're coming into your workplace, and MIOSHA is looking out for your employees. And so they look at it as you're protecting your employees by requesting that information.
Perfect. So essentially then the same rules would apply that apply to your employees would apply to your volunteers or clients or customers that are coming into your place of business as far as distancing goes if they are unvaccinated.
Right.
Okay. All right. So if you have volunteers maybe that are essentially working for your organization that are not vaccinated, then they would be required to mask and distance just like a normal unvaccinated employee would.
Yes.
Perfect. Okay. Then we had another, a couple about the proof of no vaccination, which you covered. Great. What about, Alice wanted clarification that you can put people together without social distancing if they're vaccinated. And that is correct.
Yes.
So employees that are that are vaccinated no longer have to mask or distance. In both MIOSHA and Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, they actually agree on that one.
Correct. I know.
Isn't it nice they do that once in a while?
Yeah, occasionally.
So here's another question for you. Julie says, we have customers asking employees if they've been vaccinated, and I want to know if this is legal and acceptable.
Well, it's not illegal, but I don't think your employees have to answer that. I mean, you could walk up to anyone on the street and ask them if they're vaccinated. They don't have to answer, and there's no legal recourse for them asking or you not answering. I mean, I think, honestly, I've seen a lot of businesses up here just require everybody wear masks. And then you probably don't get into that because the people who are freaked out about it are going to be, if they want to come in your business and note that everyone wears masks, then everyone's wearing masks, so it shouldn't matter. And if people aren't wearing masks, and they aren't comfortable, then they can just leave. I mean, you don't have to, your employees do not have to answer that question. It's really a business decision, honestly. It's
Right.
not illegal for people to ask it. And again, as a business owner or manager or employee, you are able to ask customers if they're vaccinated. If they do not, no, if they come in not wearing a mask, you are able to ask them if they fall under an exception that allows them not to wear a mask. You're not even asking if they're vaccinated. You're asking if they fall under an exception, which could be that they're vaccinated,
Right.
or that they can't be and can't wear a mask because they have a medical disability that, you know, interferes with breathing or something. So you can't even get a lot of information from customers, and certainly
Right.
they don't have any right to get it from your employees. It's really more of a business decision.
Megan asks, and Megan, I didn't even have to look it up because I knew exactly what you were talking about. Megan says, question in the MIOSHA ruling 5.1 and rule 8B say two different things. And you did touch on this earlier. While MIOSHA requires, CDC does not require the same health screenings as MIOSHA does. MIOSHA requires all individuals to be screened, health screened, vaccinated and unvaccinated. And as you said, MIOSHA came out last week and said the reason being is they were trying to prevent any early spread and symptomatic exposure in the office place. But it does say in Rule 8B that you're only keeping the records, if I'm following Megan's question correctly, for those who are unvaccinated. You do not need to keep the records for those who are vaccinated. Am I correct?
I don't believe so. I think that if you're required to
I've
do
asked.
health screening, yeah.
Yeah, because we asked the chamber asked directly. We were like, "Hey, hold on! You only say keep the rules for non-vaccinated," and they're like, "Yep, only for non-vaccinated." And we're like, "Okay," but you take the record of the vaccinated so that you can rule out, as you said, the symptoms.
Yeah, I don't know. If I had a client call me, I'd say keep it all. I mean, records are records, and you can't come up with them after the fact. So how do you prove you've been doing it?
By asking is what they say, right? Any other questions do we have in the chat? Just want to make sure we got everyone. And I'm looking, hang on, all of a sudden my little button's freezing up here. That's strange.
Welcome to my world.
Yeah, I'm like, okay, so I can't see the chat anymore. Come on. There we go. I think we have everything. Absolutely, Laura. Thank you so much. Absolutely. Great presentation, so much information. And we did drop in a couple things into the chat box for those who missed it or didn't see it, as far as some of those COVID templates that Laura spoke of. And then you can always go to our website that is going to have all the information and links to everybody that you need to find all of these resources, as far as your templates goes, your signage goes, the orders go, the breakdowns, very similar. And then we'll make sure we get this out to everybody as well. Thank you again, Laura.
Thanks everybody for coming. Sorry, ran over.
Oh, we'll get you back to the floor and we will go from there. Thanks so much.
All right.